Good afternoon and welcome to the CCSQ DNA Town Hall. For those of you who are new, these calls are designed to provide you with updates, announcements, training demos related to the CDR, SAS via Databricks, and more. Let's cover some quick administrative announcements before we get started today. Please stay muted during the call. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat for us to answer during the Q&A portion of our call today. Lastly, we're recording today's call and we'll make sure the meeting materials as well as the recording are available on the Confluence space after our call. So now let's review our agenda. We're going to kick things off today with our monthly satisfaction survey review and poll. Then we'll move to unified file management, data catalog pilot, implicit versus explicit connections, and then data best practice working with small data sets for testing. And then finally, we'll wrap up today with a Q&A portion. Okay, so first I'm going to pass things over to Nicole for our monthly satisfaction survey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Dilger, and I am one of the product owners for CCSQ DNA and from the user services side. So I am going to go ahead and share last month's satisfaction survey results, and then we'll do the poll for this month. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so just wanted to note that if in the bottom left portion of this slide, there is a discrepancy in the numbers, and I will update this and we'll have the right information in there. But just wanted to point it out before somebody started adding some things up and it didn't look right. So the percentages are correct. It's just the numbers in the chart are incorrect. So this is how satisfied are you with the performance and uptime of the CCSQ DNA environment? We had 63% say that they were satisfied, 7% neutral, 25% dissatisfied, 4% said NA, and we had a total of 67 responses. Just as a recap, these three slides that I'm going to be going through were taken from December's Town Hall, but when we asked for the poll results, we said we would like them for the full month of November. So what you're looking at is satisfaction ratings from the month of November. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. How satisfied are you with the support you receive from the help desk in addressing your questions or issues with the CCSQ DNA environment? We had 69% satisfied, 10% neutral, 13% dissatisfied, 7% NA, and we had a total of 67 responses. We did see quite an uptick in satisfied from October, so appreciate everyone's feedback there. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. How satisfied are you with the resources available from CCSQ data and analytics? So we had 72% satisfied, which again was 21% increase from October. I know we were able to deliver on some updated Databricks training and resources. So I'm hoping that helped. We took your feedback from previous surveys to take into account adding some additional trainings. So I'm thinking that may have helped here. We have 13% neutral, 10% dissatisfied, 4% NA, and again, 67 total responses. All right, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this, if you are new here, this is just recapping how the monthly satisfaction survey works. This survey, of course, helps us know how we can improve your experience within the CCSQ DNA environment and community. In a moment, we're going to have a Zoom poll that will pop up on your screen. You'll have 5 to 6 minutes to answer these questions. You want to make sure you're scrolling down to see all of the questions, and then obviously complete the questions that are relevant to you. If you are not using help desk or our systems in any way, then we ask that you refrain from doing the survey, just so that we don't have skewed results. Also, like we did last month, want to make sure that you are rating your satisfaction on the month of December. So we have a full designated time frame to be able to evaluate the results. So after that 5 to 6 minutes has ended, the poll will be closed. And then, of course, our results will be used to improve our tools and trainings and offerings. All right. We can go ahead and start the survey. You should now see the survey on your screen. And just a reminder, as you're answering, to scroll the whole way down to the bottom and then click submit. Thank you very much.
We have about a minute left in our survey. There are still some folks finishing up those last couple of questions. We'll take 30 more seconds. Ten seconds remaining. Thank you so much for your responses. Okay, so next we're going to be passing it over to Megan, so she can talk to us more about unified file management.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Julia. My name is Megan Nichols. For those who don't know me, probably most of you don't know me. I work on the EASS program, and today we are going to talk about unified file management. Hopefully by now, whether it's on Slack or through email, or maybe even on Confluence, you've seen or heard some mention of this new unified file management service that we're going to be using for file management going forward, which is a long way of saying the file cloud decommission memos that you have hopefully been seeing. So we wanted to share it again. On the next slide, if you want to go to it, we'll bring up some of the important dates, as well as talk through a couple of top questions that we've been getting since this process has started. So you might be wondering why it's being decommissioned, and that is going back to the fact of what I said, that it is part of the transition to a new unified file management service that CCSQ will be offering its users. All file cloud users will automatically be migrated to this new system or during this transition period. So there is nothing for you to do. In the blue there, like I said, I wanted to highlight some important dates. And I also want to just caveat by saying that, of course, if at any time there is a change to these dates, we will communicate it accordingly so that you are aware as any timelines may or may not shift. But that being said, right now, these are the important dates for you to remember. Starting this week, we began the process of migrating your personal files from File Cloud into the new unified file management system. And right now we have an expected completion date of February 5th. Another important date for you to remember is on February 8th, and that is when your team folders will be migrated from File Cloud into unified file management. And right now we have an expected completion date of March 1st. And then finally, a third important date for you to keep in mind is March 1st. And I should really say the month of March, but we wanted to put some date towards it, is that the network shares will also be migrated to unified file management. And I also just wanted to take a minute to say, if you have not already done so, we really strongly encourage you to review the files that are in your personal files. If there's anything that doesn't need to be transferred over, now would be a great time to go in and clean up those files. It will make the process overall a little bit easier, not only for yourselves, but for us too. And with that, on to the next slide, I wanted to take a minute to share some top FAQs. And actually down there at the bottom where it says need more information, if you want more information, we have a page on the decommissions FAQs page. If you guys are familiar with the quality and IT services section within Confluence, there is a longer complete list of any and all FAQs, and we are constantly updating that. And so I also want to encourage you too, if you have a question and you're like, I wonder if someone else has this question. We encourage you to use our Slack channel. Not only will we be able to see it more quickly and more people can respond to, but if someone else has a similar question, then they get to see it as well too. So you're kind of highlighting that information for everybody and making it more transparent. So what is unified file management? It is a single system for the management of our data files. And what should you do? How do I prepare for the transition to unified file management? Like I just said a second ago, really important would be for you to review all your files and data. Any content that is outdated or no longer needed should be removed. And you're probably wondering, okay, so how will I be able to access my files through File Cloud? And a key thing here to remember is once that migration has happened, they will no longer be accessible. I feel like I should say that one more time. Once your files are migrated to the new unified file management system, they will no longer be accessible in File Cloud. Another question that we have heard common is which files are being migrated to this new system, and it is the most recent version of your personal files, as well as team folders and network shares, and that goes back to the dates that I was just talking about on the previous slide. And you might be wondering too, what sort of functionality will or will not be supported in unified file management? And there are some things, and some of those things are file versioning, file locking, and marking files as favorites, and then the drive letter. And we do go into a little more detail about some other functionality that is and is not there as compared from one tool to another on that decommission FAQs. So highly encourage you to check that out. I'll pause. I've said a lot and I see there's lots of questions. I don't know if they're pertaining to me or or if they're general speaking here. But I'm just gonna, I guess I'll ask you, Julia, should we try to answer them now or after we get done the demo? How would you prefer to handle that?
Typically, we do a Q&A at the end of the town hall in general. However, because you're doing a demo, if it's easier for you to answer the questions, like as you're screen sharing or you have something that might make sense, it might be easier. That's up to you.
Okay, well, I'm seeing one from Heather, and Heather is asking, do we need to request UFM or will we automatically show up on our app page? If you have access to it right now, you won't need to do anything. That will happen as part of the migration. Another person asks, is this a new user role request or what do we need to do? Yeah, so if you don't have a role within MFT, then yes, you would need to request it, or alternatively, you wouldn't need to do anything if you have a File Cloud user role, which would mean that you have data in there and we are migrating it over, which means your role will be automatically created. And those questions that I just kind of answered that are very similar, there is actually detailed answers on that decommission FAQs, not to say that I don't want to respond now, but just that if you didn't quite catch that or you want to read it again, we have responses to that on that page as well. And the timeline of this migration, another person asked, that's kind of what I was just speaking to on the previous slide. And so it really started going today, or sorry, not today, Monday. We have been doing work prior to that. And right now the expected completion is March for everything. And again, we're trying to send out weekly communications just as a heads up, typically on Thursdays and Fridays to just keep those dates fresh in everyone's mind. They're not only sent out through your email, but they are also sent through Slack too. So those are great places to check if you want. And that is where we are communicating the dates. And again, if they do change at all from that, we will let you know. I don't know if anyone else on my team wants to add anything to some of those questions that are being asked right now, or if they feel I've covered them sufficiently.
Yeah, hey Megan. So you've done a really good job with those questions. That's pretty darn good. Yeah, I'm just looking through them as well. I think somebody asked whether or not they had a link to a network share folder or file, and so links within the system are not going to be able to be supported, but the network share itself. So if you are using a current network share within File Cloud, like you log into File Cloud, go to the network share area, and there'll be like a subfolders for different types of network shares. So all of those will be available in the unified file management system. However, if you have a link, like if there's a link that was created within the File Cloud on your browser, then that link will not work in the new unified file management, but the files, the data, and the folder will all be available.
And then, oh, there's one was when will UFM be available? And that is kind of dependent upon when we're migrating your data. But is there an actual like go live date yet? Do we have like an official date?
So official go live date for that. So as we move files over, so as you mentioned, Megan, is that they're starting this process of getting the quote unquote the personal data, the my files over. And so when we start moving the data over and we provision new users who are not in MFT already, they'll actually be able to start logging in like right away. So we're calling it the MVP would be like March 1st, because that's when everything would be done. But as we're going kind of in stages, it will be like available. Someone can log into the system now if they have an existing legacy MFT account. So but the official kind of MVP rollout would be the end like March 1st.
If that makes sense. And then how about this? I see there's so many questions and they're great questions, but just for time and everything, I'm wondering if we might pause and even if we don't get to them here, we can respond to them and I can take note of it. And Bill, you can move into the demo just because I know there's other things. And I don't know how long, Julia, those other things are slotted for, just so we could get through everything, but I will at least keep track of all these questions here and make sure we respond to them.
I'm also keeping track on my end of the ones that have been answered versus the ones that haven't been.
Okay.
So we can touch base also after the call if we do run out of time.
Sounds good.
Yep. So
where
you at? Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I'll pass it over to you. The next slide is just the demo. So I think now you will need the screen to
Okay.
demo.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you. I think now I have the ability to share it. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at, everyone. So my name is Bill Little, and I work with Megan on the Enterprise Service and Solutions team. We're a part of the file management team there. Our product owner is Patrice Ben, and Patrice is the product owner for both the File Cloud and it's currently called Managed File Transfer. That's what everyone who has access to it knows it as, and it's being rebranded as Unified File Management as we go forward. And so I did share out my screen, but just to get a confirmation from maybe Megan, can you verify you see it? Okay, thank you, everyone. Yep, thanks. Okay, so to kind of go through this demo, what we'll do is we'll just kind of look at the current File Cloud interface, look at the main areas of it, and then kind of compare what it's going to look like in the unified file management area. So this current browser that I have up has File Cloud, and when I kind of minimize this, you're going to see two other browsers because I want to kind of demonstrate two different users logging into unified file management and how the files will look for the different users. So with that, for those that are familiar with File Cloud, this is a very familiar screenshot. When you log into File Cloud, you have your main areas, you have your My Files. So as Megan was saying, that's your personal folders, personal files and folders. And team folders, this is a place where groups, organizations will share information with each other. And then there's the network shares. So network shares is typically what I think, if this is specifically for like the CDR and data analytics team, that's where they will do most of their work. So when you click on the network shares, this is some of these folders will look familiar to those on the call. And then there's a list of all the files and folders here. So this is the information that will be migrating over to the unified file management system, is the things that are your My Files, your team folders, and your network shares. As Megan was mentioned, there are some things that will not be able to be migrated over, such as some of the the versioning of the files, and that's kind of one of the main ones. So all the stuff that's being migrated over is just the current versions of files over there. So I just kind of want to start there to kind of give a baseline into File Cloud. And then, as I said, when I minimize this, you're going to see two browsers that are kind of side by side, because what we're trying to do is we're going to log into a unified file management. I'm looking at in our implementation environment, so it's not the production version. So I'll minimize that, and you'll see that there's two kind of browsers that I have. I have one on the left, one on the right. So what I want to do is I want to log in. So the URLs, just so when you do, if you're unfamiliar with the legacy MFT, the URL would be kind of qnetmft.cms.gov. That's going to be the URL for now as we do the rollout for March. So that information about the URL will be supplied, but just to So for those who already have access to MFT, that URL will stay the same for now. And you can go through HARP or go through Okta to get there. So in this case, I'm in my implementation environment for our system. So we still have this Go Anywhere MFT will still be the current login page for the March 1st rollout. Again, the plan is, I believe, to change that, but for now, we're keeping that the same. So as a user here, I'm going to, on the left side, I'm going to log in with a kind of a UAT. This was one of our user acceptance testing environments when we were doing this. So I'll just going to click the login. And when we log in, it's going through the process. It goes to Okta to verify the information. So in this case, for this demo, we only use a single factor authentication. So if you are logging in through production, of course, you'd have to use a second factor, whether it be through email, phone, or any other type of item that you use for MFA. Now, so this is the interface that we will see when we log in to the unified file management. As you might notice that, so this is the, up the top, we kind of changed the logo. This used to say like Go Anywhere MFT at the top, but this has now been replaced with the unified file management to kind of bring that home that this is the new brand for this. And so as we discussed before on the file cloud screen, there were kind of three main areas. You had my files, you had team folders, and you had network shares. So what we're going to do is when we migrate the files from file cloud to unified file management, for my files, we're not going to keep that name because there is a product limitation where two folders can't have the same name. So to avoid that collision, we were looking to have a unique name. So for now, we're going to say file cloud _ files _ your file cloud username. And that's where your my files will be. And again, these are specifically for that user, for that individual who's logged in. So this is not something that anybody can see by default, any of the entity files here. So when I go and click on this, I'll have a list of like files over here, that are these 5 or 6 files. So these are not visible to anybody else unless they are shared out. And to kind of prove that point or bring that home. So on the right side here, I'm logging in as a second user to, we'll say, the unified file management. For now, again, the login does say manage file transfer. And so when this user logs in, they're going to have the same type of folder structure. They're going to have 3 main folders at the top. Only this time, and I'll just kind of go back over here to kind of compare them. You have web test 07 versus web tester 08. So when I click on this on the right side, you'll see that there's 3 files that are specific for that individual. And then on the left side, it's the same thing. These files here, these 5 files are specific for this web user. And the only way to share those files is through basically the only way for 8 to view 7 is by sharing those files out. So for those that are familiar with kind of file cloud and UFM and with the legacy MFT, so that those concepts are pretty standard for the application. So that just kind of covers the what we call the my files area. And then there's also the team folders and network shares. So if I'll go back kind of like side-by-side view here. So the way that this is set up, so in this scenario, both these users are sharing the same team folders and they're sharing the same network shares. And this is similar to how File Cloud operates. So when I go into a team folder, I can go in here and I can look at a subfolder within my team folder, and I can see that there's a whole menu of folders, subfolders, and different files here. And this is on the left side. So on the right side, I'll kind of do the same thing. I'll say, okay, this user wants to look at their team folders. It's going to be the same team folders here. And it has the same exact structure. So these 2 users see the same files, same thing as File Cloud. If I upload a new file or if I delete an existing file, it's going to be deleted for the other person's in that other person's view. So as an example, I'll create a new folder on the right side here. Call this demo folder 1. Spell, create. And now that new folder is created within this team folder. And then right now, it's not available over here for this user on the left side until I hit refresh. And once we hit refresh, then the folder is now available. And that's a similar concept to File Cloud, how the team folders keep everything in sync. And then again, as well, you can also go into demo folder. We can also upload. In this case, we'll just pick a couple files to upload. Let's pick some random 3 files here, upload them. And as similar to File Cloud, when you do this, there is a virus scan that does take place that checks for any malware, any other viruses. If a file is bad, then you'll should receive an email indicating that the file is bad and it is removed from the system. Now, when I go back in the demo folder, so when I go here now, I will see that the files have just been uploaded here. So again, that's very similar functionality to the File Cloud. And again, these files can be downloaded as well. And that's kind of the team folder area. And the thing about, I'll say the thing, so the difference between the network shares and team folders. So the way that those are used in File Cloud is that the personal files and team folders are all maintained within File Cloud itself. So all the files are maintained within that system's boundary. However, network shares, which is what which is CDR, they have an S3 location that stores all the data. So in that case, that's external to the File Cloud system, and it'll work similar with unified file management. So when you have network shares, and you could have one to many different network shares that you have access to, and all that will be migrated over to the unified file management. The unified file management will be looking at an external location, which is going to be the CDR in this case, and you'll be able to upload and download files in a similar manner. So I think right now these folders for the demo, they're empty. And as I go from the left side over to the right side, these users will have the same folders and they have the same, they're both empty. So if I create a new folder here for demo folder 1, 2, let's just say, create that here on the right side. And then on the left side, when I go to that user and I do a refresh, then now I can see that folder there. So the information is being shared amongst users. And if I go to upload, like if we go to the left side and we upload a couple files, so we'll just pick another couple of files here and I upload them. These are small files, so they go pretty quick. And then they've been scanned as well. So I do a refresh, then those files are available. So the network shares team folders will act similar to how they do in File Cloud in the same unified file management system there. And of course, the user's personal data, which we'll refer to as the my files, which is being relabeled right now to make sure that there's no, as I said, collisions and data can be migrated over easily, or that information will be separate. And then just kind of the last thing to kind of show in terms of how to share a file between two users. So in this case, within unified file management, so if this user on the left wants to share, let's just pick out a file, say this file here. Actually, let's pick an Excel file. That's not over there. So they can come over here. Sorry, click the gear and you have a share with option. And by doing this, then you can just basically, you're putting in the username of the individual that you want to share it with. So when I start typing in, it will bring up a whole list of other users. So I can select that this is user number 8 that I want to share with. And then you could say, this is a demo share test. Whoops. And when you hit share, then it's going to share with that other user. So the system is processing that. But the browser there is processing this result. And when you do that, as you might have seen on the screen, on the other screen there was a couple options where they can share that file with other users. I believe they can also delete it or download it. So there is ways to kind of control some of the permissions when you do a share. And so this user on the left shared with the user on the right. So in this case, the user on the right here can go into their shared files and they'll see that there's now a shared file available to them. And when they kind of do that little left click, they can either accept or deny it. So in this case, I'll accept this file. And now I go back to the home. Then let's see here, where would this file actually go? Oh, no, still down here, I'm sorry. So this is where the file will actually be managed, is within here. So in this case, user number 8 has shared this file over, I'm sorry, user number 7 has shared this file with the user number 8. And so that's kind of how the user shares work within the unified file management, similar to File Cloud, where it gives you an option to who do you want to share this file with. So I think in terms of a kind of a quick demo, I think that's the quickest that we can kind of come up with to kind of demonstrate those 4 key areas within unified file management. So is there I guess, is this kind of where we do the Q&A? I'm not sure where to go from here.
I think right now, because we did some Q&A to start, we're running a little low on time. But I did make a note of, and I saw that Megan has also been answering questions in the chat, but I made a note of the ones that hadn't been answered yet, that we could get you, if you could get responses maybe after our call today,
Yeah,
to publish out. They'll be published in our Confluence space then.
perfect. Like we can also post all of the Q&A in the Help UFM chat too, just to add
Okay,
more
great.
transparency.
Yeah, that way, just so we make sure we don't run out of time today.
For sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Bill.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so next, we will be passing it over to Caitlin, to talk to us about data catalog pilot.
Hey everybody, I'm Caitlin Myers. I am another product owner on the CCSQ DNA team, specifically with the data solutions group. If you go to the next page. We are looking for participants in evaluating a data catalog solution. This solution is ideally going to enable better data discovery, make it easier to understand what data is available in the CDR, and see better descriptions of what's in there. We know what we think are the use cases that it covers and whether or not the solution meets users' needs, but we want to hear from you and have you all take a look at it too. We'll be holding sessions between February 19th and March 15th. Shouldn't take more than a couple hours of your time to go through those reviews with us. If anyone is interested or would like more information before confessing interest, please reach out to us in Slack in the CCSQ Data and Analytics channel.
Thanks, Caitlin. So next we'll be moving to Oren for implicit versus explicit connections in SAS.
Hi, so I am with CCSQ DNA also. I'm Analytics Workspace team. I'm basically with the help desk. And one of the things that we ask users try to use is you ask them to use explicit versus implicit. If you go to the next slide, please. So when you do an implicit connection, it's doing something like the DBX vibe. And I guess the first thing to understand is there are two environments in SAS where you can get data from. The first is from the workbenches. That is your workbench. That is totally SAS stuff. And then there is data that is in Hive. And that requires a connection from us to get the SAS to Hive. And that's the stuff that you use all the SAS to Databricks macros for. So when you do the DBX Lib macro, when you run that it makes one of those Hive libraries try and act like a SAS library. Only it's more like sort of like how a bike and a car are both transportations. Your car would be your normal SAS library. This library that's in Hive is more like a bike. They both are transportation. They both can get you places. If you're trying to go 20 miles, they are very different. And it's sort of the same way there. If you try and use implicit stuff, instead of doing explicit, it's not going to work as well. It's going to be much slower. And sometimes it's like trying to drive a bike in the highway. It's just not going to go. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what we do recommend is we recommend using the explicit pass-through. If you use our Hive execute SQL, that is a case of using explicit pass-through. And when you're doing that, that's what you can use to connect from a Hive to Hive. So if you want to, say, grab data from beneficiary data, and you want to move that to your team's schema, using the Hive execute SQL is usually a good way to do it. You would basically run query on that table, whatever table you're working on, and you might do some limiting stuff, or you might join with some claims data. And you will get a data set which can go to Hive, and then that you can maybe move into SAS if you want to do that. Or also the select to data set. And that explicit pass-through, that's when you want to take data from a Databricks from that Hive, and you want to actually move it into SAS so you can run some of your SAS stuff. We recommend that users use those. Next slide, please.
Do you mind? Sorry, you don't mind real quick. I just wanted to chime in. If you go back to 2 slides, the main difference here between implicit and explicit is where the processing occurs. So if you use an explicit command pass through, you're sending the command to your Databricks SQL cluster, and that's where everything's being run on a much more robust system. And even with your selected data set, you're doing all your filtering and all your other limitations on the DBX SQL compute cluster, and then passing the results into a SAS data set. Whereas when you do an implicit, it tracks all of the Hive data, pulls it all into SAS before it does even filtering, and puts it into processes it into through the PDV before it even filters your where statements or anything else. So you can imagine, like Oren said, it's like a bike. It's trying to take everything and force it into SAS first before it does anything else beyond that. And so that's the main difference between these explicit and implicit compute capabilities.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, these are just some ideas of what you can do if you want to do explicit to implicit, when you might want to do one versus the other. So when you are working from Hive to Hive, then you want to use the SQL syntax. You want to use the Hive execute SQL. When you want to move data from Hive, whether it's a CDR, whether it's on your own schema, and you want to move it to the workbenches, you want to use the select to data set. If you have data that's on your SAS workbench and it goes to a Hive schema, then if the table size is small, or if you're dealing with date, then you may want to use just the DBX lib. Otherwise, you want to use our write large SAS file, the DBX. And yeah, and can I share for a moment? Right. Just there's some examples. Julia, can you let me share for a second? Is that okay?
It should be good now.
Excellent, thank you. And just to show some examples of this, so in this query right here, what we're doing right here is we're creating 2 libraries that connect to Databricks. And this first case, we are sending some Hive data to SAS. And if we go to my log, you'll see it took about 1:14. And this is an implicit. Where here, what we're doing is we are sending data from Hive to Hive using SAS implicit. So I have this as a library name in SAS. I have this as a lib name in SAS. And I'm trying to move it that way. And as you'll note, you get an error because SAS doesn't like the fact I'm using date. And it also took 54 seconds. So one of the other reasons why not use implicit is that sometimes things just won't work. And then this is a case of using explicit for the same thing. And here we're just dropping a table. We're doing the Hive execute SQL. And if we go all the way down here, it took about 11.5 seconds. So you can see that if you can use explicit versus implicit, it will run a lot faster. And yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing. That's it for me.
You're on mute, Julia. Julia, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Can you just confirm for me that you can see this slide deck again?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now passing it over to Dan for best practice working with small data sets for testing.
Thank you. So these are, we know that a lot of people have been testing their code, changing over from, when they changed from Lombard to Databricks, and these are some of the best practices that we wanted to remind people of. If you can move forward. The So, when you're testing out code, at least in my case, generally, your priorities are three things, right? You want to see, are you able to access the data? You want to know if you have the right information for all of your merges. Are you able to actually do the proper joins or the proper transformations you require? And then mostly, is my syntax correct? And when you think about it, for questions 1 and 3, like, can I access my data or is my syntax correct? You don't really need much data at all. I mean, honestly, you could have 1 or 2 records and that would be sufficient to run the code and identify whether or not the syntax is correct. For number 2, if you have enough information for your merges and transformations, that varies based on process and completeness and things like that. But I mean, even 100 to 1,000 records would be sufficient. The reason we recommend doing this is because it speeds everything up for you, right? Like when you run a step and you're trying to troubleshoot it, every time you run it, it's taking time. It's creating the new tables. It's doing everything else in there, loading data into it. And so, but ultimately, that's not your biggest concern. Your concern is, does my process work? Is my syntax correct? And so the less data you're using in between those things, the faster your process, the faster you're going to be able to identify your syntax errors, and the faster you're going to see the processing changes. As an added benefit, also I do want to share for everybody who's using the SAS environment and you're doing like Hive execute SQL, things like that, you're using a shared resource as well. So everybody uses the same Databricks cluster, which I know we've a lot of us have seen like resource issues being used by a lot of people. And so obviously, if you're using less data and you're using up fewer resources and more people can do the same work at the same time. Obviously, every case is a little bit different as to how much data you really need, but in your initial pass-throughs, definitely try to keep your data sets as small as possible and think about that in how you're processing your work. If you want to move forward to the next slide. Thank you. So, just a simple reminder that, in SAS syntax, you can take care of this by in your set statement, in your data step, in the set statement, you can just set your obs equal to whatever number of observations you want to use, however many number of records you want to be using, whether that's 10 or 100, or 10,000, whatever is necessary. But again, this will be sufficient to load in your PDV and be able to do everything, the syntax checks and validations of the syntax. Likewise, when you're doing a SQL statement, whether it's a proc SQL or whether you're doing a Hive execute SQL or any of those things, at the end after your from statement and all your other conditions, you can do limit and then set it to a limit of records. So in this case, limit 100. I did want to call out one additional feature that people may not be familiar with or aware of. Juliet, would you mind pressing the button one more time? Did you know that you can use, if you have access to a Databricks notebook, you can test your SQL code in there. So as we pointed out in the earlier components, when you're running an explicit pass-through, you're actually submitting your SQL code to Databricks to run it in a Databricks cluster. So although that's a shared cluster that's configured slightly differently, you can use your own, if your organization has set up everything for your own Databricks notebook, that is going to run the same code the same way. So for example, if you're trying to troubleshoot your SQL code for Hive execute SQL or select a data set, you can actually pass your code, you can develop your and test your queries directly in Databricks and then just copy paste the final query into your SAS macro. The one thing you'll note is that the communication that can be sent back in the logs from Databricks to SAS is different than the communication that Databricks actually has within its own system. So your notebook logs are going to be a little more informative if you're having a problem with the failures. So that's something I would recommend trying out if you've got a lot of those that you want to test or along those lines. I will note that the Databricks notebook doesn't have access. That particular case, when you set it up on your org's notebook, you don't have access to the SAS macro variables that you would be using. So you'll have to hard code those in just for the testing purposes. And then when you copy paste it back into SAS, you can use the SAS macro variables and do a final test that way. Also, when you run a Databricks notebook for your organization, you actually won't be competing with as many people for the for resources, because you'll have your own compute cluster. And that's just what I wanted to share with everybody as a reminder, that frequently we forget about, we just want to test something, and we know that in production, we're not going to want to have the limited sizes. But when we're trying to, keep in mind what your real purpose is, and if you want quick turnaround and quick checks of your syntax and everything else, limit your data sets in between, and that should help everybody be faster. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes for Q&A. So Dan, since you were just presenting, I don't think we had any from Oren's presentation. Do you want to answer a couple of questions for us? The first one being, please remind analysts how to zip or gz the file / folder on Workbench.
I don't know that that's
Yeah, so users can always run our %halt macro. And if you look at our %halt macro, it will give instructions on how to use those two macros. At the moment, you can only do zipping files, whether it's gzip or whether it's regular zip, by using those macros. And if you just run %halt, you'll be able to find you'll be able to see what we have.
Thank you, Oren. It's been a minute since I had to do that part.
And then there's a couple of questions where people are inputting examples in the chat itself, which might be easier to circle back to later unless you have the chat up. I'm looking now if there's any others that are more straightforward. I don't see any right now outside of people posing specific examples that have not yet been answered.
Yeah. I will go through this chat and make sure we get back to people specifically about the SAS macro questions. Yeah, there are caveats to a lot of stuff, and we are in the process of updating some of these things. Hive Explain, I don't think works nearly as well as what Ambari did, but that was because Ambari had a unique setup with its proprietary driver.
Okay, we'll make sure then to collaborate with our presenters today and make sure that all questions do get answered, and then they'll be posted to our Confluence space so the community can see them and get the information they need then.
Yes, and I believe we're going to try to either specifically make these slides available through the Confluence page, or otherwise I'll work with user help desk to make sure that those examples and the best practices slides can be accessed by all users.
Thanks. Yeah, and then also the recording will be available as well.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for presenters for providing us information today. And thank you to our community for joining us today. All meeting materials will be available on our Confluence space shortly. And then please take a look for our upcoming events and dates. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us via email or Slack. Thank you so much for joining us.